They call him the Prince of Darkness, the Serpent of Eden, the fallen star who challenged heaven itself. But what if the greatest villain in history was never meant to be evil at all? What if Lucifer, the word that chills through sermons and paintings, once meant light? What if the devil's name originally belonged to the morning star, that radiant beacon that rises before dawn and vanishes at sunrise? This is not the story of horns and fire. It is the story of a word twisted by centuries of translation, fear, and power. A word that once symbolized knowledge, before it became a curse. Tonight, we trace the light before the fall, the man, the myth, the mistranslation. This is the true history of Lucifer. Long before theologians named their demons and painted hell in the colors of flame, there was only light. The ancients looked to the sky and saw Venus shimmering against the dying night and called it Lucifer, the Lightbringer. To them, it was divine, a promise that even after darkness, dawn would come, the very symbol of renewal and hope. But language is fragile. Words shift like sand beneath theology's weight. When prophets wrote in Hebrew, translators rendered it in Greek, then in Latin. And with every step, meanings warped. What once was a planet became a fallen angel. A metaphor for pride became a story of rebellion. And the Lightbringer, the herald of day, became the devil himself. For nearly 2 millennia, the name Lucifer has embodied fear. Churches were built on the warning it carried. Do not rise above your place. Do not reach for divine light. Yet hidden beneath that warning lies a deeper human truth, our eternal tension between curiosity and obedience, the desire to know more, to see more, to be more, even if heaven forbids it. Every culture has told this story in its own way. Prometheus stealing fire, Icarus soaring too close to the sun, Eve reaching for the fruit of knowledge. All share the same heartbeat, the defiance that defines humanity. Lucifer's fall is our reflection, a myth not of pure evil, but of boundless ambition. So tonight, we walk through scripture and legend, through poetry and fear, tracing how light became shadow. This is not a tale of damnation, but of transformation. Because before there was Satan, before there was hell, there was Lucifer, and his light still burns. The name that shines. What Lucifer really means. Before the devil, before the fall, before fire and brimstone, there was a word. Lucifer, in Latin, it meant something simple and beautiful. Lightbringer, Luxfer, was never meant as a name of evil. In ancient Rome, poets used it freely. Virgil wrote of the Luciferum Caeli Candorum, the bright light of the heavens. Cicero used it to describe Venus, the morning star, the planet that rose before dawn. It was a title of splendor, of divine brilliance, not of rebellion. To early astronomers and philosophers, Venus represented paradox. It was the brightest object in the night sky, yet it vanished when the sun rose. It carried light into the world only to disappear before day's full glory. This cycle, rising, shining, falling, captured the imagination of ancient thinkers. When Christian translators encountered this celestial symbol in the Hebrew Scriptures, they carried its poetry with them, but not its innocence. In the book of Isaiah, a taunt was written against a fallen Babylonian king. How you have fallen from heaven, O shining one, son of the dawn. The Hebrew term was Hela ben Shakar, but when St. Jerome translated it into Latin for the Vulgate, he chose the word Lucifer. And that one choice, a single word, forever changed the world's perception of evil. Soon, Lucifer was no longer the morning star. It became a name, a being. The angel who tried to ascend higher than God, the bright one who fell. Yet the Bible itself never names the devil Lucifer. That identity came centuries later, forged not by revelation, but by interpretation. What had once been Venus, the bringer of light, was reborn as Satan, the enemy of heaven. And so, a simple title of beauty transformed into a myth of ruin. The name that once shone across the morning sky now burns in sermons as a symbol of arrogance and fall. But to truly understand how Lucifer became the devil, we must return to the source, to the verses, the mistranslations, and the fears that shaped the dawn of theology. Morning star in the Bible, from Isaiah to Revelation. The story begins in the Old Testament, not in hell, but in Babylon. Isaiah 14:12 speaks of a king brought low after arrogance. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. It's a poetic insult, not a metaphysical event. The prophet was mocking a ruler who thought himself divine, a mortal who believed he could ascend among the gods. There was no devil here, only human pride dressed in royal robes. But language has power. Over time, the morning star came to represent something greater and more dangerous. In the book of Revelation, written centuries later, the morning star reappears. But this time, it is Christ who bears the title. I, Jesus, am the bright and morning star, the same symbol used for both ultimate good and ultimate evil, a contradiction embedded within Scripture itself. It was this paradox that theologians wrestled with for centuries. How could the same celestial image describe both Lucifer's fall and Christ's glory? Some argued that it was deliberate, a divine irony. Others saw it as proof that Lucifer was once angelic, radiant, almost Christ-like, before pride darkened his light. The duality of the morning star became a reflection of creation itself, good and evil sharing the same roots. When medieval scribes copied and recopied the Vulgate, the association hardened, the poetry vanished. The metaphor fossilized. Lucifer was no longer a fallen king. He was the fallen angel, the prototype of all rebellion. And yet, hidden within the text, the ambiguity remains. The Bible never calls Satan Lucifer. It never describes a heavenly war led by that name. Those images came later, from imagination, not Scripture. In the end, the morning star stands as a mirror. It is both divine and damned, radiant and ruined, the eternal symbol of ambition punished. In every era, humanity has looked to that same star and seen itself striving for light, yet haunted by the fear of falling. The king of Babylon and the misread prophecy. If you could travel back to the 8th century BCE and ask Isaiah who Hello Ben Shakar was, he would not have spoken of demons or angels. He would have pointed to Babylon, to its king, swollen with pride, proclaiming himself a god among men. This morning star was a metaphor for mortal arrogance, a ruler who rose high, only to fall from grace. But centuries later, when Christianity spread across a dying Roman world, prophecy took on a new meaning. Readers saw not a Babylonian monarch, but a celestial being cast down from heaven. The metaphor of the king's fall merged with the myth of an angel's rebellion. One became the reflection of the other. And with that fusion, theology changed forever. By the 4th century, church fathers like Origen and Tertullian began reading Isaiah allegorically. To them, Babylon was not merely an empire, it was the kingdom of pride itself. The king's downfall was the pattern of all rebellion. Pride, they said, began in heaven with Lucifer and spread to earth through Adam. Sin was cosmic imitation. Humanity, in its arrogance, mirrored the first angel's defiance. Thus a political poem became a divine tragedy. The story of a mortal king turned into the myth of the devil. When Jerome translated Hello as Lucifer, the identity was sealed. The bright one of dawn became the archetype of evil. A linguistic choice became spiritual law. It is one of history's most haunting transformations, how metaphor became theology, and how a fallen ruler became the eternal rebel. And yet, in that misreading lies something profoundly human, our need to find cosmic meaning in human pride, and to give our flaws a face. Lucifer became that face, the mirror in which all ambition is condemned. How Lucifer became the devil. It didn't happen overnight. For centuries, early Christians spoke of Satan, the adversary, but not Lucifer. The devil was the tempter, the serpent, the accuser. But as theology evolved, thinkers sought a beginning, an origin story for evil. They asked, where did sin come from, if God made all things good? Slowly, Lucifer filled that void. By the 5th century, the idea of a fallen angel, once radiant, now corrupt, became irresistible. Dumb church fathers fused together fragments: Isaiah's fallen star, Ezekiel's lament over the king of Tyre, and Revelation's dragon cast to earth. Piece by piece, they stitched a myth from Scripture's poetry. Lucifer emerged a creature of dazzling light who dared to challenge the Almighty and was hurled into the abyss. This narrative became the backbone of Christian imagination. It explained why evil existed, why pride was the deadliest sin, why humanity needed redemption. Lucifer was both warning and explanation, the story that made sense of rebellion, temptation, and fall. But perhaps the most striking part is this. Nowhere in the Bible does God say the name Lucifer. It is we translators, theologians, storytellers, who gave him life. The devil as we know him was born not in Eden or heaven, but in human interpretation. And once the story took hold, it never let go. From pulpits to paintings, from cathedrals to children's prayers, Lucifer became the symbol of all defiance, the Lightbringer turned shadow, the angel who flew too high, the Vulgate and the power of translation. If there is one man who unknowingly changed the world's understanding of evil, it was Saint Jerome. In the 4th century, he sat by candlelight, translating the Hebrew scriptures into Latin, the language that would define Western Christianity for 1,000 years. And when he reached Isaiah 14:12, he faced a choice. How to translate Hello Ben Shakar. He chose Lucifer. It was a poetic choice, elegant, even fitting. But it carried unintended consequences. For Latin-speaking Christians, Lucifer now lived in the sacred text. Over generations, people forgot the word's original meaning and assumed it to be a name. And in a religion where language is sacred, translation is never innocent. It is creation. The Vulgate became the official Bible of the Catholic Church. Priests, scholars, and artists all inherited Jerome's single word and built upon it. In illuminated manuscripts, Lucifer's fall became visualized. In sermons, it became moralized. And slowly, the bright star of Venus sank beneath theology's horizon, swallowed by hell. Yet some scholars, even in medieval times, suspected the truth. They noted that in early Latin texts, Lucifer was used for Christ as well. They saw the contradiction but dared not challenge the Church's authority. The myth had already solidified, and no light could undo it. Thus, from a poet's flourish and a translator's choice, Western civilization inherited one of its most enduring figures, the devil of light, the fallen star, the eternal adversary, all born from a single, shining word. The war in heaven, origins of the fall. Long before humanity drew its first breath, theologians imagined a war unlike any other, one fought not with swords or fire, but with will. The war in heaven was the cosmos' first conflict, a rebellion that shattered eternity's peace. Began with a question whispered in the light. Why should God alone be adored? In ancient Christian and Jewish thought, angels were not identical beings. They had ranks, powers, dominions, principalities, arranged like a divine army. At its peak was one radiant figure, perhaps the most beautiful of them all, Lucifer, the bearer of light. But beauty in the heavens as on earth is a dangerous gift. Some theologians described him as the morning star among the angelic host, luminous, perfect, but restless. And in that restlessness, rebellion took root. The book of Revelation speaks cryptically of a great dragon whose tail swept a third of the stars from the sky. Early Christians saw this as symbolic of Lucifer and the angels who followed him. No smoke, no fire, no physical war, but an intellectual revolt, a spiritual uprising against divine authority. Pride was their weapon. Desire was their downfall. When the rebellion broke out, Michael, the archangel of obedience, rose to defend the throne. Who is like God? His very name proclaimed, a challenge to the arrogance of the fallen. And so heaven was divided not by violence, but by conviction. Those who stood with God remained in light. Those who sought their own glory were cast into the abyss, and thus the myth was set. Heaven's first war became the eternal pattern of all rebellion, all sin, and all fall. Lucifer, the first to defy the Almighty, became the prototype of pride itself, proof that even perfection can decay when it begins to adore its own reflection. Lucifer's pride, the sin of light. In every faith that dreams of angels, pride is the deadliest poison. For pride does not destroy with hate, it corrupts with love of self. The theologian Thomas Aquinas described Lucifer's sin not as hatred of God, but as disordered desire, the wish to be like God, to hold divine beauty within oneself rather than reflect it. Lucifer's light in this telling became unbearable even to himself. He saw his own brilliance and mistook it for the source of all creation. Pride, the Church taught, was the root of all evil, precisely because it disguises itself as good. Lucifer did not desire destruction. He desired greatness. His tragedy was not monstrous ambition, but misplaced admiration, the wish to worship his own light instead of its giver. This subtlety made the myth deeply human. For medieval thinkers, every sin was an echo of Lucifer's pride, the same longing to be one's own master. From kings who defied God to monks who sought personal glory, all rebellion was Lucifer's shadow on earth. Pride was not just sin, it was contagion. In illuminated manuscripts, Lucifer was often drawn still, radiant wings outstretched, face serene moments before his fall. Artists captured the irony that the devil was once the most beautiful of God's creations. Even Dante, centuries later, would remember this, that the brightest light casts the darkest shadow. In the end, Lucifer's pride was not simply rebellion against God, it was rebellion against dependence itself, the refusal to acknowledge that even beauty belongs to something higher. Theology found the origin of evil, the angel who loved his own reflection more than his creator's light. Michael the archangel, heaven's champion. Every rebellion breeds its opposite. If Lucifer was pride incarnate, Michael was faith embodied. The angel of divine order, Michael stood not for blind obedience, but for cosmic balance. His name, Mika, literally asks the question, who is like God? It was both his identity and his weapon. In the celestial war, Michael represents not raw power, but clarity of purpose. Where Lucifer's radiance burned with self-love, Michael's light reflected something higher. Theologians often described him as the shield of creation, the being who reminds heaven that harmony must sometimes be defended with force. When Revelation speaks of Michael casting down the dragon, it's not merely describing a battle, it's illustrating a principle, that good must stand against arrogance, even in the heavens. Michael's victory symbolizes divine justice, the triumph of humility over pride. That's why medieval knights prayed to him before battle, why cathedrals were dedicated in his name, and why he became the patron saint of those who fight inner demons. But there's a deeper layer. Some early mystics believed Michael's victory was not total. They said Lucifer's fall was permitted not to destroy him but to fulfill a greater purpose. Evil, in this sense, was not chaos, but contrast, a dark thread woven to reveal light's brilliance. Michael and Lucifer, then, were not enemies by chance. They were the two poles of creation itself, faith and freedom, order and desire. And thus the war in heaven becomes something more than myth, it becomes a mirror of human struggle. For every heart knows this battle, between humility that heals and pride that burns. The nature of the fallen, from angels to demons. What happens to an angel when it falls? Does beauty vanish? Does memory fade? Medieval theologians asked these questions with dread fascination. The answer, they believed, was worse than destruction. The fallen angels retained their brilliance but twisted. Their minds, once pure, became cunning. Their light turned inward, devouring itself. In early Christian cosmology, the fallen were not simply banished. They were transformed. Their fall was psychological, not just spatial. Cut off from divine love, their immortal essence decayed into malice. The demons of later centuries were, in this view, angels still burning with the same intelligence and passion they once had, but without direction, like suns collapsing into black holes. Writers like Gregory of Nyssa describe the fall as a kind of madness, an inability to bear divine presence. The light that once uplifted now tortured them. They remembered heaven, yet could never return. And so in pain and envy, they turned their will toward corruption, not to destroy creation outright, to spoil it, to prove that light without love leads only to darkness. Over time, this theology merged with folklore. The fallen angels became devils lurking in dreams, tempting men and women toward pride, lust, and despair, the same sins that mirrored Lucifer's own fall. Demons, said the preachers, do not hate humanity because they are alien. They hate us because we replaced them. Perhaps that is why the myth endures, because it is not about monsters, but loss. To fall from grace is to remember the light you can no longer touch. The first rebellion in Christian thought. The early church wrestled with the question that haunted every believer. Why would a perfect angel rebel? Augustine of Hippo offered one answer, because free will was divine. To make creatures capable of love, God had to make them capable of defiance. Lucifer's fall, therefore, was not an accident, but the price of freedom. This idea transformed Christian thought. Evil was not an external force, but a distortion of good, a shadow cast by freedom itself. Lucifer was not created evil. He became evil by choice. And in that moment, theology shifted from myth to moral philosophy. The fall of one angel became the eternal lesson of free will. Others, like Origen, saw Lucifer's fall as cyclical, that even fallen spirits could, in theory, return to light. This notion was declared heresy, but it persisted in secret, the hope that no soul, not even the brightest fallen one, was beyond redemption. By the Middle Ages, Lucifer's rebellion was no longer just celestial history. It was the template for human sin. Every act of arrogance, every grasp for power, was a miniature replay of the first defiance. And thus the devil was no longer merely a character in heaven's tragedy. He was a psychological truth. Lucifer's story became the architecture of morality itself, a reminder that pride begins not with hatred of the divine, but with the whisper, "I deserve more." Venus, the morning star, and pagan roots. Long before the name Lucifer echoed through churches and scripture, humanity looked to the sky and saw the same brilliant morning star, Venus, blazing just before dawn. Ancient people were captivated by this celestial body that rose with glory, only to fade as the sun ascended. To them, it was not merely a planet, but a divine metaphor, the eternal rise and fall of light. The Babylonians called it Ishtar, the goddess of both love and war, whose descent into the underworld mirrored the fading of the morning star. The Greeks knew her as Phosphoros, the bringer of light, and to the Romans, she was Luciferus. In every culture, Venus symbolized the fragile balance between brilliance and pride, a light so pure it could not last. This ancient symbolism would later intertwine seamlessly with Christian theology. The image of a radiant being, glorious and luminous, rising only to fall, felt eerily parallel to the story of the angel cast down from heaven. The transformation from Phosphoros to Lucifer wasn't a simple mistranslation. It was a collision between myth and theology. Humanity's fascination with the morning star, its beauty, and its inevitable fall was older than any scripture. When Christian translators borrowed the Latin Lucifer from Roman astronomy, they unknowingly carried forward this mythic legacy, linking Venus's light to the story of pride and ruin that would define the devil himself. In this sense, Lucifer's roots are not demonic but cosmic, born not in the fires of hell, but in the shimmering dawn skies. The morning star was never evil. It was a mirror for human ambition, a celestial parable that whispered, even the brightest must bow before the sun. Prometheus and the fire of knowledge. If Lucifer's rebellion was an act of pride, then Prometheus's defiance was an act of compassion. The Greek Titan who stole fire from the gods to give to mankind embodies a theme strikingly similar to the Lightbringer. Both figures rebelled against divine authority to offer enlightenment, one literal, one spiritual. Prometheus's fire was more than flame. It was knowledge, art, and civilization. It was the spark that separated humanity from the beasts, and for that, he was punished, bound to a rock where an eagle devoured his liver each day. Lucifer, too, in later interpretations, became the rebel who challenged divine order, the one who questioned, who sought to rise above his place. The parallel between these myths is not coincidence. Both Prometheus and Lucifer represent humanity's yearning for forbidden wisdom, the belief that enlightenment comes with suffering. The church fathers who shaped Christian theology saw in these myths dangerous echoes, a glorification of rebellion disguised as enlightenment. Yet to later philosophers, from Blake to Shelley, both Prometheus and Lucifer became heroes, symbols of defiance against tyranny, divine or otherwise. Thus, Prometheus's fire and Lucifer's light fuse into one timeless archetype, the idea that the quest for knowledge always comes at a price. The gods may have intended punishment, but in the hearts of humankind, these rebels became torchbearers, misunderstood champions of progress against cosmic authority. The Egyptian and Mesopotamian parallels. The idea of a radiant being who falls from the heavens didn't originate with Christianity. It existed thousands of years before in the myths of Egypt and Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt, the god Set rebelled against divine order, slaying his brother Osiris and disrupting the harmony of the cosmos. He was not pure evil, but chaos personified, a necessary force of imbalance in a world that prized order. The Egyptians understood darkness not as damnation, but as an inevitable part of creation. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamian myth, the goddess Inanna Ishtar descended into the underworld, a symbolic fall from celestial glory. Her journey through 7 gates, where she was stripped of her divine symbols, mirrors the Christian imagery of the fallen angel losing his grace. Even earlier in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we find the celestial being Etana, who flies to high toward the heavens, only to plummet back to earth, a tragic echo of Lucifer's doomed descent. These ancient myths were humanity's first attempts to grapple with the cycle of ambition and downfall, light and darkness, creation and destruction. By the time Christianity arose, these stories were already embedded in the collective human psyche. Lucifer's legend, therefore, was not invented from nothing. It was an inheritance, a reimagining of older cosmic dramas. The devil, in this sense, is not merely a Christian figure. He is the culmination of millennia of mythic storytelling, where every civilization saw in the heavens a reflection of its own struggle between order and rebellion. The Serpent of Eden, Lucifer, or something older? The book of Genesis tells of a serpent who tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, an act that introduces sin into the world. Yet the text never calls this serpent Satan or Lucifer. That association came much later. In early Hebrew tradition, the serpent was a symbol of wisdom, transformation, sometimes healing, not necessarily evil. Only after centuries of reinterpretation did the serpent become fused with the fallen angel, creating the hybrid image that dominates Western imagination, the devil as both snake and lightbringer. Ancient cultures worshipped serpents as symbols of regeneration. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, represented eternity and cosmic balance. In Egypt, the serpent Apep battled the sun god Ra, embodying the endless struggle between light and darkness. When Christian theologians adapted these symbols, they redefined the serpent's wisdom as deceit and its eternal nature as rebellion. The original act in Eden, then, became not a lesson in curiosity, but a warning against questioning divine order. This reinterpretation served a moral purpose, to transform the ancient symbol of knowledge into an emblem of sin. Yet deep beneath the surface, the serpent still whispers the same message it carried in older myths, that enlightenment comes through risk, and that those who seek truth must first taste the fruit of defiance. The Lightbringers across cultures, across the world, from Mesoamerica to the Far East, stories of luminous rebels and fallen stars repeat with uncanny similarity. In the Maya tradition, the god Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, brought wisdom and agriculture to humanity. In China, Fuxi and Nua molded humans from clay, their serpentine bodies linking them to the same primal symbolism of wisdom and renewal. The Persian figure, Ahriman, the dark twin of Ahura Mazda, embodies rebellion against divine light, echoing the duality later seen in Lucifer. Even in Norse mythology, Loki mirrors this archetype, the trickster who defies the gods, bringing both chaos and necessary change. Every culture, the bringer of light or knowledge, is both savior and destroyer, loved and hated, punished yet immortalized. It is as if humanity has always needed such a figure to make sense of its own contradictions, our longing for enlightenment and our fear of what that enlightenment might reveal. Thus, Lucifer is not alone. He stands in a vast lineage of lightbringers, from Prometheus's fire to Inanna's descent, from Venus's fall to the serpent's whisper. He is the eternal rebel of the human soul, the spark that refuses to die, even when heaven turns its face away. St. Augustine and the Philosophy of Evil. In the 4th century, St. Augustine, once a restless seeker of pleasure and later a devout theologian, reshaped how the Christian world understood Lucifer. Before Augustine, evil was often seen as a rival force, a cosmic duality between light and darkness. But Augustine rejected that. He declared that evil had no existence of its own. It was simply the absence of good, a shadow cast when creatures turned away from God. From this idea, Lucifer's rebellion became the perfect example of what happens when light chooses itself over its source. Pride, Augustine said, was the beginning of all sin, the love of one's own power more than the power of the Creator. This reframing had immense consequences. Transformed Lucifer from a misunderstood being of light into the embodiment of spiritual disorder. He was no longer merely a fallen angel. He was the archetype of the will that refuses to serve. In Augustine's Theology, the fall wasn't just a historical event. It was a metaphysical truth. Every human soul, by pride and disobedience, mirrored Lucifer's rebellion. The devil's story became humanity's story, the ceaseless tug-of-war between divine illumination and self-worship. Yet, Augustine's view was paradoxical. He saw Lucifer not only as evil incarnate, but as proof of divine justice. Without the fall, there could be no redemption. Without the shadow, light could not reveal itself. And so, the devil became necessary, a dark reflection within God's perfect plan. What was once the radiant morning star had now been turned into a theological necessity, the eternal symbol of error, ensuring that goodness had something to triumph over. But deep beneath, Augustine's philosophy lay an unsettling question, one the Church would spend centuries avoiding. If Lucifer's rebellion was foreseen and permitted by God, was it truly rebellion at all? Or was it a role written into the divine script? In the uneasy silence that followed, the Church found its answer not in reason but in fear, fear that would define the Middle Ages. Dante's Inferno, the frozen Satan. When Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy in the early 14th century, he painted the most enduring image of Lucifer ever conceived, not as a raging god of fire, but as a vast, motionless figure trapped in ice. Deep within the ninth circle of hell, Lucifer is imprisoned waist-deep in a frozen lake, his wings beating endlessly, creating the very cold that binds him. He has three faces, each eternally devouring a traitor, Judas, Brutus, and casts symbols of betrayal against both divine and earthly order. Dante's Lucifer is tragic, not merely evil. Once the most beautiful of angels, he is now grotesque, frozen by his own pride. His wings, once symbols of glory, now create his eternal torment. Die. In Dante's Theology, hell is not punishment imposed from without, but consequence born from within, sin turning in upon itself until it becomes paralysis. Lucifer's fall, then, is the ultimate act of self-destruction, light becoming its own darkness. What makes Dante's vision haunting is its silence. Lucifer never speaks. He doesn't roar or argue. He weeps. His frozen tears are the last remnants of his lost divinity, crystallized in eternal regret. For medieval Christians, this image wasn't just art, it was warning. Pride, ambition, rebellion, all roads that lead to self-made hells.
Sure.
The one's Lightbringer became a monument to stillness, a being who sought to ascend and instead fell into a pit of his own making. And yet Dante's readers couldn't help but feel pity. The deeper one descended into hell, the more Lucifer resembled man himself, proud, punished, and broken by his own design. In the ice of Dante's Inferno, humanity saw its reflection. Milton's Paradise Lost, the heroic rebel. 3 centuries after Dante, John Milton shattered the silence of the frozen Lucifer. In Paradise Lost 1667, he gave the devil a voice, eloquent, defiant, and tragically noble. Milton's Satan is not a grotesque beast, but a fallen hero who dares to declare better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. His rebellion is framed not as evil, but as ambition, the hunger for self-sovereignty. In Milton's hands, Lucifer became the first romantic, a figure of freedom, intellect, and doomed courage. Milton's portrayal scandalized the Church. His Lucifer was dangerous not because he was monstrous, but because he was relatable. Readers saw in him the echo of their own yearning, the desire to choose one's destiny, even in damnation. Critics have long debated whether Milton intended Satan to be sympathetic or simply a cautionary figure, but the result was inevitable. Lucifer became the prototype of the modern anti-hero, the one who challenges God and pays the price for truth. For centuries, poets, revolutionaries, and philosophers have drawn inspiration from Milton's Lucifer. William Blake famously wrote, "The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, and at liberty when of devils and hell, is because he was of the devil's party without knowing it. This devil's party, the admiration of rebellion, became a cornerstone of modern thought. The fallen angel ceased to be just an emblem of sin. He became the symbol of the human spirit refusing to bow. Through Milton, Lucifer regained the light he had lost, not the divine light of God, but the fire of defiance that burns within every soul that questions authority. The devil's transformation into a tragic hero was complete. The Church's fear of knowledge and light, as the Middle Ages waned and Europe stumbled toward the Renaissance. A new tension emerged, the same one Lucifer once embodied. Knowledge, discovery, and curiosity began to challenge the authority of the Church. Scholars studied forbidden texts, astronomers peered into the heavens, and alchemists whispered of light hidden within matter. The Church, feeling its grip loosen, returned to Lucifer's story as its warning. The pursuit of forbidden light always leads to damnation. Lucifer became the eternal metaphor for intellectual rebellion. To question doctrine was to flirt with the devil. The idea of illumination, once sacred, was recast as dangerous. The word Lucifer itself, meaning Lightbringer, began to carry suspicion. When scholars like Galileo faced persecution, their defiance echoed the same mythic pattern. Mortals punished for daring to touch divine fire. Ironically, this fear only fanned the flames. As human reason blossomed, Lucifer's symbolism shifted from horror to inspiration. Artists painted him with tragic beauty. Poets described him as misunderstood. The forbidden light he carried began to look more like enlightenment than evil. In silencing inquiry, the Church had resurrected the very spirit it sought to destroy, the Luciferian impulse to seek truth beyond the boundaries of faith. Thus, the medieval Lucifer, once the warning of pride, became a reflection of humanity's intellectual awakening. The sin of seeking knowledge transformed into the birth of science, art, and modern consciousness, and once again, the Lightbringer rose. Lucifer as mirror of man. By the end of the medieval era, Lucifer was no longer just a theological villain. He was a psychological revelation. He embodied the duality within every human being, the yearning for transcendence and the pull toward self-destruction. Theologians had turned him into the warning of pride. But poets and thinkers saw in him the raw essence of humanity's struggle for freedom and meaning. Lucifer's rebellion was the story of human consciousness itself, the awakening of self-awareness, the birth of the ego that dared to say, "I am," in this sense. His fall from grace symbolized the very moment humanity became aware of choice and thus of morality. The light he carried was not evil, but understanding, the dangerous awareness that good and evil are intertwined. Medieval man feared Lucifer because he saw too much of himself in him. To look into the fallen angel's eyes was to confront ambition, envy, love, and despair, all the qualities that make humans divine and damned in equal measure. The Church's portrayal of Lucifer as the other masked an uncomfortable truth. He was not outside us. He was us, by turning the morning star into the enemy. The Church drew a line between obedience and knowledge, between faith and freedom. But in that separation, humanity inherited both gifts, heaven's light and hell's fire. And from that moment onward, Lucifer ceased to be a myth. He became the mirror of the human soul. Lucifer in Gnosticism, the liberator. Long before the Church declared Lucifer the Prince of Darkness, a quiet rebellion stirred among early Christian sects known as the Gnostics.
Out to them.
Light and darkness were not moral absolutes, but symbols of knowledge and ignorance. The true evil, they argued, was not rebellion, but blindness. In their secret scriptures, the Serpent of Eden, long condemned as Satan, was instead a liberator. He did not tempt mankind into sin. He awakened humanity from ignorance. And in that awakening, the Gnostics saw Lucifer's true essence. In Gnostic cosmology, the world was a prison crafted by a false god, the demiurge, a jealous and imperfect creator who sought to keep souls enslaved. The real, unknowable God existed beyond, in the realm of light. When Lucifer, or the serpent, offered Eve the fruit of knowledge, he was not corrupting mankind, but freeing it from the demiurge's control. Knowledge became salvation, and rebellion, enlightenment. To Orthodox Christianity, this was blasphemy. To the Gnostics, it was revelation. They saw Lucifer not as the enemy of God, but as the enemy of false gods, the bringer of wisdom hidden by the powers of ignorance. In their rituals, light was not feared, it was sought. Every spark of curiosity, every act of questioning authority was a sacred echo of Lucifer's defiance. The Church, recognizing the threat of such ideas, silenced Gnosticism with violence and erasure. Yet the seeds of this belief, that Lucifer was the liberator rather than the destroyer, survived underground, waiting for centuries until the dawn of the occult revival. Lucifer, though banished from heaven, would return in whispers, cloaked in mysticism and hidden philosophy, the Cathars, Templars, and secret light. In the dark corridors of medieval Europe, rumors spread of heretics who worshipped a hidden light. The Cathars of southern France, a pacifist, mystical Christian sect, believed the material world was evil, a trap forged by a corrupt deity. They saw Christ and Lucifer as two sides of a cosmic struggle for freedom from flesh. Their Lucifer was not a devil, but a radiant being once trapped by matter, a fallen spark yearning to return to divine purity. The Church called them Luciferians, accusing them of worshipping the devil. But in truth, the Cathars sought liberation through ascetic purity and knowledge. Their secret gospel taught that the true fall was not rebellion, but creation itself, the imprisonment of spirit and matter. The Church could not allow such ideas to thrive. The Albigensian Crusade was launched, and the Cathars were burned alive by the thousands, their light extinguished, or so it seemed. At the same time, the Knights Templar, once the Church's champions, were accused of similar heresies. Tortured confessions spoke of a mysterious idol named Baphomet, said to embody hidden wisdom. Whether myth or misinterpretation, the Templars became entwined with the Luciferian image, men of the cross who sought knowledge forbidden by their masters. Centuries later, occultists would see in the Cathars and Templars the secret keepers of the Lightbringer's flame. They were painted as early seekers of the Luciferian ideal, those who sought enlightenment beyond fear, beyond dogma. The Church had burned their bodies, but their myth, the myth of hidden light defying divine tyranny, only grew stronger. Renaissance magic and the Luciferian mind. When Europe awakened from the medieval slumber, the Renaissance brought a dangerous revival, the worship of reason, art, and the divine spark within man. Scholars unearthed ancient Greek texts, rediscovered Hermetic philosophy, and whispered of a force that bound heaven and earth through knowledge. And in that revival, the name Lucifer began to shimmer again, not as Satan, but as intellect itself. Figures like Giordano, Bruno, Pico della Mirandola, and Marsilio Ficino embraced a belief that the divine was not confined to the Church, but lived in the human mind. Bruno spoke of infinite worlds and divine fire in all things, ideas that echoed Lucifer's light. For this, he was executed, burned at the stake in Rome. His defiance, immortalized in flame, became two later thinkers, a new Lucifer, punished for illuminating truth. Alchemy, too, carried Luciferian undertones. The alchemist's fire symbolized the transformation of base metal into gold and of ignorance into wisdom. To pursue forbidden knowledge, to unveil the secrets of creation, was to walk the same path as the morning star. Artists painted Lucifer not as a monster, but as a radiant youth, the embodiment of fallen beauty, punished for daring to know. The Renaissance redefined sign. Pride, once the devil's crime, became the driving force of human achievement. Man, once content to kneel, now stood tall. The Luciferian spirit had slipped past the Church's chains and taken root in philosophy, science, and art. Knowledge was no longer heresy, it was divinity reborn, its enlightenment, and the rise of the morning star. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries brought the final metamorphosis of Lucifer's myth. The thinkers of this age, Voltaire, Goethe, Blake, no longer feared the devil, they admired him. He was no longer the corrupter of man, but the symbol of rebellion against ignorance, tyranny, and superstition. Where priests saw blasphemy, philosophers saw liberation. Lucifer became not a spirit to banish, but a metaphor for intellectual freedom. In Goethe's Faust, Mephistopheles tempts man not with sin but with curiosity, the urge to explore the forbidden. Faust's pact with the devil is not mere damnation. It is the pursuit of all knowledge, all experience. In this story, Lucifer's curse becomes man's greatest gift, the hunger to understand. William Blake went further, writing that the reason Milton wrote at liberty, when of devils and hell, is because he was of the devil's party without knowing it. For Blake, Lucifer was not evil, but the creative impulse suppressed by religious tyranny. The morning star became the patron saint of thinkers, artists, and dreamers who refused to bow before imposed truth. By the Enlightenment's end, Lucifer had fully transformed. He was no longer the prince of darkness, but the spirit of light, the eternal challenger of authority and the spark of divine reason in mankind. What began as a fall from grace had become a flight toward freedom. The Lightbringer had reclaimed his name, Theosophy, occultism, and the rebirth of Lucifer. In the 19th century, as science dethroned, superstition and religion lost its monopoly on truth, a new spiritual movement rose from the ashes, Theosophy. Founded by Helena Blavatsky, it sought to unite science, mysticism, and ancient wisdom into a single cosmic philosophy. In her writings, Blavatsky boldly proclaimed Lucifer as the symbol of enlightenment, the light that reveals, the fire that transforms. Two Theosophists. Lucifer was not the devil, but the spiritual intelligence that awakens man to self-knowledge. He was Prometheus reborn, punished for gifting humanity the flame of divine understanding. This was not worship of evil, it was reverence for the rebel within the human soul. Theosophy's Lucifer represented the eternal seeker, the one who dares to question even the gods. Simultaneously, secret societies like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and later occult movements embraced the Luciferian archetype as a force of illumination, not corruption. To invoke Lucifer was to invoke the courage to know oneself fully, to confront the shadow and find light within it. By the turn of the 20th century, Lucifer had become something more than myth. He was the ultimate paradox, the destroyer who enlightens, the fallen who ascends, the rebel who redeems. From Gnostic heresies to occult philosophies, his fire burned quietly through the ages, igniting the minds of all who dared to seek the forbidden truth that illumination and rebellion are often one and the same. The devil in pop culture. As the modern age dawned, Lucifer stepped out of the shadows of theology and into the flickering light of the silver screen. Elect the printed page and the electric pulse of modern myth. Once the archenemy of heaven, he became something far more complex, a tragic anti-hero, a reflection of humanity's fascination with rebellion and forbidden knowledge. The 20th century did not banish Lucifer, it reinvented him. From early literature and cinema, the devil was reimagined as charming, witty, and dangerously intelligent. Films like The Devil's Advocate and Lucifer Rising portrayed him not as a horned beast, but as a seducer of minds, appealing to human desires for power, freedom, and truth. Comics and television took this further. DC's Lucifer Morningstar, a suave fallen angel running a nightclub in Los Angeles, became the very symbol of rebellion wrapped in charisma, questioned heaven's authority, but more importantly, he questioned why evil exists at all. In music, too, Lucifer's image found a new rhythm. From the haunting blues legend of Robert Johnson's Crossroads Deal to rock icons like the Rolling Stones, Black Sabbath, and David Bowie, the devil became the emblem of artistic defiance. To dance with the devil no longer meant corruption. It meant creativity without chains. Rebellion became beauty, and Lucifer, the eternal Lightbringer, became an icon of those who refused to obey the unexamined rule. Pop culture's Lucifer no longer hides in hellfire. He lives among us. It's a metaphor for ambition, independence, and inner conflict. He is not the enemy of God, but the mirror of man, showing us what happens when we reach for divinity and dare to face the consequences. The Lightbringer had become a cultural phenomenon, a living myth that evolves with every generation that dares to look into the fire and see itself. Lucifer in literature and art? Artists and writers of the modern era saw in Lucifer the perfect muse, a being of impossible beauty, punished for pride, yet forever radiant in defiance. The romantic poets of the 18th and 19th centuries, disillusioned with rigid morality, reclaimed Lucifer as the first tragic hero. Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and William Blake all painted him as the emblem of human struggle, the one who would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. Shelley's Prometheus unbound, and Byron's Cain transformed. Lucifer's story into allegories of intellectual and emotional rebellion. In Blake's art, Satan was not a monster but a misunderstood angel, a symbol of creative fire stifled by law and conformity. Each stroke of paint and word of verse turned Lucifer from villain to visionary, from destroyer to liberator of the human spirit. Visual art mirrored this literary transformation. Painters like Gustav Doré and Franz von Stuck depicted Lucifer not as grotesque, but tragically divine, a radiant figure exiled by his own brilliance. His fall was no longer divine justice. It was the price of greatness. To fall, in art, became an act of transcendence, the refusal to bow, the assertion of self. By the 20th century, this vision permeated the world of surrealism and symbolism. Lucifer appeared in everything from Dali's dreamscapes to comic book panels, each iteration peeling away another layer of religious fear to reveal a deeper truth, that the line between angel and devil exists only in the eye of the one who judges. The psychological archetype, Jung's shadow. As science replaced superstition and psychology replaced exorcism, Lucifer found new life not in religion, but in the human mind. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, described every human being as possessing a shadow, the repressed, denied aspects of the self. Jung Lucifer symbolized that shadow perfectly, the unacknowledged brilliance and darkness within us all. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is the part of ourselves we fear. It holds our anger, lust, ambition, creativity, everything we are told to suppress. When denied, it becomes destructive. When embraced, it becomes transformative. Jung believed that spiritual maturity required the integration of the shadow, and in this sense, to face Lucifer was to face one's own truth. Lucifer, the Lightbringer, thus became the psychological key to self-realization. He represented the part of humanity that refuses submission, that questions dogma, and that dares to illuminate what others would keep hidden. In confronting Lucifer, one confronts the self, the divine, and the damned in equal measure. Modern psychology's reinterpretation of Lucifer stripped away the mythological veil and turned him into an inner archetype. The devil was no longer an external force tempting man. He was the inner fire urging man toward understanding, balance, and wholeness. The ancient fall from heaven had become an inward journey toward enlightenment. Lucifer in modern religion and Satanism. By the mid-20th century, as traditional religion declined in influence, a new wave of spiritual movements began reclaiming Lucifer's name openly, not as worship of evil, but as a symbol of self-deification and freedom. The Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey in 1966, did not revere a literal being, but embraced Lucifer as the archetype of individualism, the rejection of conformity, and blind obedience. To LaVey's followers, Satan represented the carnal, instinctive side of man, the honesty of desire rather than the hypocrisy of false virtue. Lucifer became the intellectual rebel, the philosopher who stands alone against imposed morality. Later branches of Luciferianism, distinct from LaVeyan Satanism, emphasized enlightenment over indulgence, the pursuit of hidden wisdom, and personal transformation. In these modern philosophies, Lucifer is not the enemy of God, but the friend of the seeker. His fall is seen not as a curse, but as a voluntary descent into the human condition, a willingness to suffer ignorance for the sake of bringing light to others. This reinterpretation transformed the cosmic war between heaven and hell into a symbolic drama of consciousness, where every human soul is both fallen and divine. Across modern spirituality, from occultism to esoteric Christianity, Lucifer has come to represent not sin, but the eternal quest for light. He is the reminder that enlightenment often requires rebellion, and that to find the divine, one must sometimes walk through the fire of doubt. The light within darkness, what Lucifer means today. In today's world, Lucifer stands not as a demon, but as a mirror. His myth has become a canvas upon which humanity paints its eternal struggle between freedom and obedience, reason and faith, light and shadow. We no longer see him as the monster of the Middle Ages. We see him as a reflection of ourselves, flawed, yearning, and unafraid to question. The modern Lucifer is everywhere. In literature, in film, in psychology, in rebellion against tyranny, both spiritual and societal. He is the whisper that says, "Think for yourself." He is the fire that drives innovation, art, and discovery. Yet he also warns that pride without compassion leads to ruin, that every light can burn to bright and consume itself. Perhaps this is the final truth of Lucifer, that he is neither evil nor good, but a reminder that both exist within us. He is the eternal paradox, the angel who fell for loving his own light too much, yet who continues to inspire mankind to reach for its own. In the end, the myth of Lucifer endures because it speaks to the oldest of human instincts, the desire to know, to create, to transcend. And as long as there are minds that question and hearts that seek truth beyond the boundaries of fear, the morning star will rise again, not in rebellion, but in understanding. For even in the darkest night, the Lightbringer's fire still burns. So now, as we close this long descent and ascent through thousands of years of theology, poetry, and human imagination, we find Lucifer standing not in the flames of hell, but in the quiet reflection of our own eyes. His story from radiant angel to fallen star was never just about rebellion against heaven, it was about us. Our endless struggle between light and darkness, between the will to obey and the will to become. Every era reshaped him, prophet, poet, philosopher, or priest, and each time he revealed something about what we fear most, what we secretly desire: freedom, knowledge, and the courage to ask why. Lucifer is more than a name. He is the echo of every mind that dared to question, the torch in the void, the flicker of light that refused to be extinguished. And perhaps that's why his story still haunts us, because we, too, are creatures of both heaven and fire. If this journey through the myth of the Lightbringer made you think, question, or even feel a spark of wonder, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden, the historical, and the haunting truths that shaped our world. Comment below. What does Lucifer mean to you now? A fallen angel? A misunderstood rebel? Or the reflection of something within us all? Like the video, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, not to glorify darkness, to understand the light that hides within it.